Hope you all are doing well. I thought I would take just a little bit today and talk about my experience in terms of my birth trauma and birth recovery. The course is going to be linked below in the comments if you have not seen it, gotten it, whatever. So, I had my first child in 2016. It was very unexpected. I had started having some swelling issues and nobody had really paid attention to what the cause was or symptom, other than it was normal, until it was too late. And so I was induced. I hadn't done a whole lot of research either because that was the last thing on my mind. I didn't even want to think about it. So I hadn't really done a whole lot as far as researching what I should know about. So they induced me with a drug called Cytotec. Cytotec is not labeled for induction at all. So I found that out later. I did, however, avoid the Pitocin. I did not have to have Pitocin given. Whether it was just because they were patient, because my blood pressure remained high and they didn't want to do anything to cause more blood pressure issues, I'm not sure. But my water actually broke on its own. So, anyway, so we got to the hospital and from the time I checked into the hospital, I had no more say in what happened to me, my body, my child, honestly. They decided they were going to induce me. They were apparently afraid that I was gonna have a seizure, so they weren't letting a nurse leave my room. She was just awkwardly standing there. I'm like, okay, you can leave now, I'm fine. She's like, no, really, actually, I can't. We're kind of afraid you're gonna have a seizure. I said, oh. Probably shouldn't have drove the 40 minutes home then, should I? She just sighed and looked at me like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, I felt fine this entire time. My blood pressure was high, but I felt fine. Per hospital regulations, I was not supposed to eat or drink. My husband was gracious enough to sip me drinks of water when the nurses weren't in the room. I was not allowed out of my bed without nurse there to make sure I didn't fall over on the way to the toilet. They did let me go to the bathroom by myself though, which was nice. So a lot of times I would go to the bathroom and honestly just sit there because it was out of the bed. I was able to just relax, be by myself and relax. That's actually where my water broke, was on the toilet. So but they were feeding me ice chips. I was consuming ice chips as frequently as I could. I was used to drinking about 1.5 gallons to 2 gallons of water a day by this point. And I had only had, by the time I checked in there, maybe 1/2 gallon to 3/4 of a gallon of water. So I was going through ice chips like crazy because I was thirsty. I wasn't hungry. I was not hungry at all. But I was thirsty. I was very thirsty. I was going through ice chips fast enough that the nurse told me that I needed to slow down on them. To which I looked at her like she was insane and crazy. Because I was also starting to get a headache at this point. And I don't get headaches very often. And I am very, very familiar with the types of headaches I get. And this one was very clearly my dehydration. I was getting dehydrated. And they wouldn't believe me. They wouldn't give me water. They wouldn't give me fluids. When I asked why, she goes, well, your blood pressure is extremely high. We don't want more fluid pressure on your veins. I said, but I'm dehydrated. Finally, after a couple hours, I looked at the nurse. I called the nurse in because they had left. I said, you have to do something for my headache. I cannot see straight anymore. My head hurts. I can't sleep. I can't rest anymore. And I had done enough research by this point to know, like, I needed to rest because the hardest work job was coming up, right? So I didn't sleep much that night. They did finally give me 2 Tylenol, which I promptly threw up because I hadn't eaten or drank anything in 12 hours. What's gonna happen? So with that, they did finally start fluids though after that. Believe me that I was dehydrated and started fluids. My blood pressure was going up again at this point before they started the fluids. They did get it back under control. And then I did not get a lot of sleep. Between the cuff going off every 15 minutes and just being uncomfortable in the bed and not being allowed to move, and so I didn't sleep a whole lot. 6:30 in the morning rolled around and I asked to go to the bathroom again, and they let me, and I sat there for a very long time, like just sat there because it was relaxing. I could just let my pelvis relax. I could just be by myself. I didn't have somebody, I wasn't hooked to a monitor. I wasn't hooked to anything. I could just sit there. And I sat there long enough, the nurse came back and knocked on the door to make sure I was okay. To which I was like, oh crap, I'd better hurry up. Like, I was very much focused on being others, not on myself and taking care of my needs. And I should have been, because nobody else was looking out for them, or at least psychological needs, or emotional needs. So, and it was also during this point that my water broke while I was sitting there. And I told the nurse, like, my water broke while I was in there. And she goes, are you sure? And I looked at her dead serious, because by this point I was getting really irritated with the nurses for not listening. I looked at her dead serious, looked down between my legs, and went, well, it's definitely not pee still running out from between my legs. And then she kind of just shuffled off. Nothing more after that. 7:30, and by this point, like, as I was starting to kind of feel like I might be going into labor at this point. And by might be, I mean I was kind of sort of uncomfortable. I'd had very mild contractions all night long. Like, very mild, like the nurse had to tell me I was having contractions. Because to me it was just very, very mild period cramping, which is a contraction, but like it was enough, like I was not uncomfortable by any means. I did have one sweet old nurse who looked at me during the middle of one of them. Well, she asked me, are you having any contractions? I'm like, no. Just like mild cramping, like nothing big. She looked at me and go, honey, those are contractions. Oh, okay. So, 7:30 in the morning rolls around. The doctor walks in and announces that they're going to do a C-section. Much to my total shock, surprise, had no idea, like no warning it was coming whatsoever. Okay, I'm like, well, I'm gonna go to the bathroom again at least. Between me getting up, I went to the bathroom. They finally left the room long enough my husband could get changed, because he was had to get changed into surgery garb. And they placed the catheter, which was very painful. They yelled at me for almost cussing. I didn't cuss. I said mother trucker. It was close though. I was not very happy with my anesthesiologist at all. And then they wheeled me off to the OR. My husband was right beside me. And at the operating door, they held him up. They looked at him and said, and I couldn't see him because he was far enough behind me, I couldn't see. They looked at him and said, you the dad? He goes, yeah. Wait here. I freaked out. Like, I don't know if I was visibly freaking out, but internally I was panicked at this point. My blood pressure very quickly started going up. I don't like needles, and I knew there was a needle coming for me on the other side of that door, and a very long one. So they got me sat up. They attempted to place the spinal block and missed twice. Did not believe me. They hit a nerve. Actually, they hit a nerve when they placed it, and it hurt. It hurt when they placed it. So much so the nurse told the anesthesiologist which leg it ran down because it involuntary kicked her in the stomach. I had no control over it. Laid me back, and I told him I'm not numb, like I can still feel my toes. And he did the pinch test, and he goes, "Can you feel this?" And I felt him pinch me all the way down. Now, whether he wasn't listening because I wasn't talking very loud by this point, or what was going on, I have no idea. But I was not numb. The sheet goes up. The two doctors walk in. They proceed to start poking on my stomach. And one of them says, "Here," and pokes. And I hear a "yeah." And I internally screamed, and externally, I don't think it was quite as loud as it was in my head, said "ow," because that was literally the only thing I could say at that point. I remember when Jeremy, my husband, walked in saying I'm not numb, looking at him almost like face pleading for somebody to listen. He doesn't remember me saying anything. So I don't know if I was at this point so far out of it and so stressed, like I could not form words at this point, because it was about this time that the room starts going spotty, and I knew my blood pressure was extremely high. Again, no headache yet, but like splotches, and like they were thinking I was going to have a seizure at this point. Because the doctor looked at the anesthesiologist in disbelief that I wasn't numb and that I could feel that. And they both looked at the monitor and said, "I can just knock her out." And that was the last thing I remember. The next thing I know, I remember waking up in pain, extreme pain, and being passed out, knocking out again. When I woke up again, they wheeled me back to the room, and my husband was holding my daughter at that point, and I remember looking at her and not really, like, I never had those strong maternal emotions or connections with her. But I also remember telling myself, like, this is what you're supposed to do, so you're going to do it until you feel it. Because you're not going to be that person or that cow in my head, because that's what I've always worked with, that they have to force to take care of their kid. Like, you're going to do it, because that's what you're supposed to do. So I did. And I faked it until I made it. It took a very long time. I used an oil blend named Joy, because somebody told me it helped with maternal bonding. So I used it, and I used a lot of it. And eventually we did bond. It took a long time, and we had a very, very tough journey breastfeeding. But I was also too stubborn to give up. In my mind, I did not get the birth I wanted. I did not have anything I wanted in her pregnancy or birth. So I was going to get one thing that I wanted, and I was going to breastfeed her. And it took a lot of, she was failure to thrive. And it took a good 3 weeks of triple feeding before I finally got a supply established. And we were able to actually make our breastfeeding journey. I was on maternity leave for 9 weeks, and I bet we spent 8 of those trying to get breastfeeding going. Like I said, it was not easy. And I continued. I went back to work. I buried everything that happened. I ignored it. I went, be thankful that you are alive, your daughter's alive, because it very well could have went differently. That's all the more I did with it. Except that I was still in pain. I was in physical pain for a very long time. Hi, kitty. At about the 9-month postpartum mark, 9-10 months, somewhere in there, I actually changed jobs. I could not physically do my cowboying job anymore because I was in so much pain. A position came open as a data tech, which was an office job, which I swore I would never have. But I was like, I have to do something. Like, I cannot keep going the way I am. Kitty, thank you, but you got it down. So I switched jobs. It was still with the same business. And I was in that position 2 months. And I was in more pain. I was in physically more pain than I was cowboying. So I decided to seek out other answers. Because all I was getting at my OB was that was normal. It was nerves regrowing. There was no scar tissue. And it'll be fine, just wait it out. I was 10 months postpartum, almost 11. And I could not wear pants all day. I was in so much physical pain by the end of the day from work that I could not. I would come home and I would take my shorts off. And I didn't ride when I got home. I didn't do any of my yard work when I got home that I love because I was in so much pain. So my husband actually listened and heard an ad for an OT. And that was advertising postpartum care and pelvic health. He goes, maybe you should go check it out. So I did. I said, I got nothing else to lose. Called them, said, yeah, but for insurance to take it, you're going to get a referral. So I called my doctor and said, I'm going here. I'm in more pain now than I was 2 months ago when I saw you. I'm going. And she sent the referral over. Hi, kitty. I'm outside, so. It was then that I actually started to heal. So what they found when I got there was there was scar tissue. There was a lot of scar tissue. So the scar on the outside looked very, very pretty. It had healed very well. But underneath, there was massive amounts of knots of scar tissue. And, sorry, I gotta get a jacket on. It's cold out here. And in that scar tissue, what had happened was it had actually bound up my colon. The question they continued to ask me while I was getting care there was, are you having regular bowel movements? Because they couldn't believe that I was. Because there was so much scar tissue, it had literally bound my colon. So it couldn't move properly. My colon was trapped. I went, oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. Some of these other things, because I was having regular bowel movements, but they weren't good. And I was never completely emptying, and I could tell that because I had bloating in my abdomen. Hi. So, through that, they also pointed, I had an excellent OT. It was actually my first introduction to how emotions can play into physical health. She worked on my abdomen, let's see, November, December, January, February. 3 months, 2 to 3 months, with me going up there 2 times a week. 1 to 2 times a week, depending upon what was going on. And what they found, and it was like it would get better, but it wouldn't completely let go. And by the next week, like, it would be tightened back up. About the 2-3 month mark, somewhere in there, I was getting extremely frustrated. I was getting ready to start looking for other alternatives, like what else can we do? because we just weren't seeing progress. And what she did actually, that session, she came in, she was a very peppy person. Love her to death. Hi, Kitty. She came in, and it was a question that she had asked me multiple times before, but had never gotten this reaction. She walked in with her assistant, she usually has a student with her, and said, "So when are you gonna have kids again?" I lost it. I completely just sobbed, frustrated, broke down. So I had sworn off ever having kids. I was never gonna get pregnant again when I left the hospital with my daughter. And she goes, "Okay." And she knew that. She goes, "I've asked you that before, and that's not the reaction I got. So let's walk through what happened again." She knew she was waiting for what they call a breakthrough. And she knew it was coming, which was why she asked it when she did. And what a breakthrough is, or crack open is another term for it, is when the emotions come flooding through the physical pain. So she had suspected that there was a lot of emotions tied in with that scar tissue that was not letting it go. And she also knew that to let that scar tissue go, I was going to have to work through those emotions. They were going to have to come out. They were going to have to be unburied. So that's what we did. She was actually working with some internal things on my pelvis, and her student was actually working on my abdomen, on specifically my colon region. And she goes, "Okay, let's walk through what happened again." And this time, we identified the emotions. And what came out of it was I was feeling abandoned. I had felt, what was the other one? I had felt abandoned. I had felt used. I had felt unheard. I had felt like something had been stolen from me and violated. That was the other one. So we went through this, and as we went through that story in the beginning that I told you, my birth story, she actually had to stop working. She and the student both, because things were tightening up so much in my pelvis as we got to the really strong emotions that she couldn't move. And they were doing more damage at that point, trying to move the scar tissue. So we all breathed, took a breath, and she pointed me to this book, which is also, I'll link it below, but it's Understanding the Messages of Your Body. And she goes, "Take this home, read it." And specifically, she flagged the parts that she wanted me to read between now and when you come back. And then she also gave me some affirmations. She said, "Whenever these feelings come up, I want you to say these affirmations. And I want you to continue to do this every day, morning and night, more times if you need it. But at least say them morning and night." She goes, "What that's going to do is it's going to help change that emotional pattern and release those emotions and process those emotions." So from there, I did a lot of processing. She gave me some oil tips to use as well, as far as helping to continue to bring things up. And I started digging in on my own, and I found the importance of physical healing and dealing with the pain, but also the emotional aspect of it and how to bring those up and how to deal with those emotions and everything. So fast forward, we are at see, probably a year and a half post having my child, my daughter. And I was still not sold that I was still not sold on the idea of getting pregnant again. But through I did a lot of wrestling with God and talking to Him and just wrestling it out with Him, because ultimately, like, the final healing and redemption was going to come from Him, and I knew that. And it was very clear one day. It was late in the summer, and very clear one day that He said, you've healed almost everything. You've healed emotionally, you've healed physically now. But that memory is still painful for you, and you need me to redeem that. But I can't redeem that until you get pregnant again. You are going to have to get pregnant again to walk through it my way, for me to show you how it can be done. So I wrestled with that for a while and proceeded to finally, after a week or two of wrestling with that information, I actually said, okay, gotta understand this now, but I don't know when I'm gonna be ready. So, because you obviously know me better than I do, you created me, you know how everything works, you know my heart and mind better than I do. When I'm ready, you allow me to get pregnant. Until then, keep my wound closed, but I'm not going to prevent it anymore. Up until then, we were actively, preventing having another child. Hadn't gone back on birth control because I did not like what it did to me when I was on birth control. I struggled with birth control when I was on it. So, he did. A couple months later, it was September, I found out I was pregnant with my son. I said, okay, this is exciting. That was a little faster than I anticipated, but this is your time. I was at peace with it. That was the first time in any of my pregnancies that I was at peace with being pregnant. And I knew this pregnancy was going to be different, and it was from the get-go. So we took our time. We did not make any decisions without praying and weighing all the options and listening. So much so that I was fairly late in my pregnancy. Late is relative, but late for most providers. Before I actually had my first appointment with my midwife. I found a midwife who was willing to work with the PTSD that I was experiencing. And I did not, for the very long time, I did not believe that I had PTSD from her birth. Until I walked into an office building and there was a machine in there that was beeping, just like the hospital monitors. And I was on the verge of an anxiety attack, just like that, by walking in and hearing that machine beep. I was like, okay, yes, we definitely have some issues here. So I knew I had that. I knew I had to have a provider who was going to be able to work with that. And for me, this midwife was the only option, really. We interviewed several providers, and none of them was going to work the way she was going to. So I had several appointments with her. I should have processed more with her, but I didn't. I was still very guarded about a lot of things. And she had warned me, you are going to have to deal with a lot of these emotions before it happens, before the birth, because that can stall your birth. And I had dealt with most of them at this point by the time I had found her. So I wasn't too concerned about it. I had my son. It was summertime. And my water broke very early, 6:30 in the morning. It seems to be a popular time for me. And then nothing really happened for a very long time, and I was okay with that. My husband took my daughter into daycare. He went to go feed cows. I went to the couch and I took a nap. Because I'm like, all right, this is going to happen this time, and we're going to let God do his timing. So at 11, I was like, okay, things should probably start moving. I actually used some oils to help get labor going, but I also wanted to make sure my husband was going to be able to be home. So I actually called him first and said, hey, are you at a point where you can stop? You have everything done that needs to be done. He said, yeah. I'm like, okay, then I'm going to start this, and you should probably head home shortly. And labor started fairly quickly after that. I had a very long labor with my son, but I got to labor at home. There are some things I would have done differently in hindsight. Mostly I would have kept moving longer, honestly. I had immense amount of back labor with my son. But I had a midwife and her assistant who were very good at working with me, helping put pressure where pressure needed to go. And my son was born at home. I can go into his labor later. But it was very peaceful the whole time. It was peaceful and it was redemptive. When he finally was born, I was exhausted. But I was relieved. I looked at him and I whispered, we did it. And I thank God. I prayed through pretty much his entire labor really, really strongly at the end. Because he was a big boy. He was a very big boy. And his head was coming cockeyed, not straight. So, of course, the biggest part of his head was coming first, which made him even bigger. And yeah, I was at total peace and relief after his birth. A month later, I think, I had finally gotten his newborn album had come in, with all of his birth pictures, and newborn pictures. We had a friend take them for us, and we had a friend take pictures of my daughter too, as a newborn. And she took them, I put them in an album, and I never looked at them again. Because every time I brought out that album, it was painful. It was emotionally and physically painful for me to look at those pictures. I couldn't do it. So my son's birth photos came in, and I looked at them, and my daughter wanted to look at hers. I was like, oh, okay, let's do this. Let's look at them. But I gotta go downstairs and find them, because they were downstairs. And we looked through her albums. Guys, that was the first time I had looked through those pictures without feeling pain. That was the first time I looked at them and was able to appreciate what happened and remember the positives of that birth, not just the negatives. The positive and feel thankful and grateful. That was the first time that happened. And to me, that was this final yes. That was God confirming and saying, I did redeem this. I redeemed your daughter's birth, just like I redeemed your son while he was being born. So, that is as short as I can make it without going into a lot of the details. It was a lot longer than I wanted it to be. But that was the story of how I learned to overcome birth trauma and deal with it, and came to have a redemptive birth. In the outline, without going into all the nitty-gritty details, because we could be here forever. I am going to link in the comments here my course that I created to help others go through this same thing. It was very difficult for me to go through because I felt very alone, and no one should have to do that alone. It is my firm belief that you should not have to go through this alone. So that is all for now. I am going to sign off here and start my chores, and we'll catch you guys all later on the other side in the vault, where we talk about more details about the specifics of how I actually healed.